Hello everyone. Welcome to the housing webinar. Thank you for being here. I'm just trying to see if I can get myself on screen so you see who is talking here. That would be nice. But I don't know why it's not working. But anyway, you can hear me. So welcome everyone. My name is Arlinda. I work for the International Marketing Department and I will be hosting this webinar together with my colleague Lo. He will introduce himself shortly. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk you through housing in Utrecht. We're going to tell you all the ins and outs about finding accommodation in Utrecht and give you a lot of insights and tips and tricks. You probably noticed that we have a Q&A that you can see on the side. And in this Q&A, you can post any questions that you might be having. So if you have any questions, you can just type them in the chat and my colleagues will be there to answer them. If it gets really busy, then don't worry, maybe your question will be answered a little bit late, or we will just skip your question because it will also be talked about in the presentation actually. So you will hear about it in the presentation as well. And of course, we try to answer every question as best as possible. Another cool tool that we have in this webinar system is that you can like questions of someone else. So if you see that someone else asked the question and you think, hey, I also want to know about that, I'm also very interested in that, then you can actually like it. So you can give it a thumbs up, and that is very handy for us to see so we know which ones are the most important questions. So yeah, I think those are the technicalities. We're gonna have about I think 15 to 20 minutes presentation first, and then afterwards we're gonna do a live Q&A. So Lo is gonna point out some questions that you've been having in the chat, and then we will answer them on screen. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna hand over to Lo, who's gonna do the presentation. And then afterwards we will have a live Q&A. All right, Lo, you can take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lo. I work with Arlinda and all the folks waiting for you in the chat. So as Arlinda said, we'll be talking about housing today. And we know that this can be a bit of a difficult subject, and we're not the kind of people who will sugarcoat it for you. So we're going to give you a realistic look at it. Like Arlinda said, sort of just take your approach to the Q&A calmly, in that most likely I'm going to answer any questions you might have in the presentation. And then we also have a wonderful website that we'll want to direct you to for any additional questions you might have. And then in the case that that still doesn't get your question answered, then after the webinar, you can always email our housing officers and they can get you the help you need. So that being said, welcome, and let's go over what we're going to look at today. So we're going to talk about a few things. We have the reserved accommodation program, how it works, what it's like, where it's located, and how we'll be addressing the ongoing situation that we've all been living through for over a year. And then since that is a bit limited, we're also going to cover some other ways you can find student housing, and then how to budget for your housing while you do whatever study you're doing at Utrecht, whether it's a degree or an exchange program. Okay, so let's get right into it then. Let's start with the reserved accommodation program. Dutch universities don't own any student accommodation or campus housing. This is different than US universities or British universities. Utrecht University does offer reserved housing options for new international students. This housing is reserved with various housing providers, so the contracts and booking is directly with the provider. Most international students start their search for housing by applying to the reserved accommodation program. But unfortunately, we can't guarantee you a spot as housing is limited. Unlike student housing on the private market, for reserved accommodation, you're not selected by the current tenants or during a group viewing or something like that. Instead, this can be booked from abroad on a first-come, first-served basis. So here are some important facts about this program. The rental periods are fixed, so it is not possible to stay longer or cancel prematurely. Also, it is not possible to book this type of accommodation if you plan to stay for a shorter period of time than the fixed period that it's offered for. So exchange students, you can't book a 1-year contract and only remain for 5 months or something. That you're ineligible for that kind of housing. And same goes for degree students who are looking to only stay in the Netherlands for part of their degree or something like that. Offerings are limited, so finding a place via this program is, as I said, not guaranteed. For all accommodation options, offers usually book up extremely quickly, so make sure to read up on when, how, and who as soon as possible. Another thing that happens is we get a lot of questions about arriving later, starting the rental period later, or paying later. Unfortunately, this is where we don't have any flexibility around this. So whatever it says in terms of what the period is, it's that, and there's no negotiation there possible. So, for example, if you are starting your housing contract in July but not arriving until August, you still need to pay the rent for July. The average cost for housing options and further specifications are also available at the housing website, which is uu.nl/housing. And I'll be referring you to that website quite often throughout this presentation. So you'll hear me say it again. You can see it here on this slide even. So how do you apply to reserved accommodation? The steps are fairly simple. First, you'll need to check if you're eligible. If you have any questions about your eligibility, you can just contact Student Services at uu.nl before booking opens. Then from there, you're going to check registration and booking dates and times. And these can differ depending on which group of students you belong to and the housing provider. The exact instructions will be on our website. So like I said, I'm probably going to be talking up the website a lot. Apply with the housing provider on the booking date and time. Now, some students ask us and seem to think that if they book rooms in lots of different providers, they're raising their chances of getting a room. And they say, oh, I like this one or this one, and they have preferences. But if you do that, it creates chaos in our system. So please only book with one provider, one room, one provider. If you're free to register with as many as you want, but only book one. You really shouldn't do this because if you do, and let's say 2 providers choose you for that room, it's random which one you're assigned, and it may not be the one to your preference. The second reason why not is perhaps that there's some non-refundable costs that you won't be able to get back, so you've then lost some money there. And the third is that in trying to book multiple rooms, you've actually taken a room away from someone else. We don't have the capacity to help you get the room that you prefer if you're booking multiple rooms. That'll be assigned randomly. And then we also don't have the capacity to figure out, oh, okay, wait, this person isn't taking that room. Now we need to put someone in there. So please just limit yourself to one booking. And yeah. Then, okay, finally, if you are able to place a reservation, you're required to make the payments and sign the contract on time. And so that's our last step in this 4-step process. Here's a few images of what accommodation may look like. So the program offers private rooms and private studios. For rooms, you would share facilities like kitchen and bathroom with your housemates. So these are usually rooms inside student apartments. And usually your housemates will be international students. You can see some of these furnished rooms here, and they're from different providers. The program also offers single person accommodation only. It is, however, not suitable for couples or for children and families, and no pets are allowed. So if you're trying to get a room just on your own with your own facilities, that is also possible, but also very limited. The housing reserved via the UU program for internationals is set up with basic furnishings. How the accommodations are furnished differs per housing provider, the type of accommodation, and residence building. Usually this includes curtains, flooring, a single-person bed, a mattress, a desk, chair, and a wardrobe. Some housing providers also offer additional packages that you can buy with kitchenware or bedding. And so, just to give you some context, in the private market, sometimes when you rent a space, it may not even have flooring or lighting. So that's why flooring and curtains are included in the description of things you'll receive in a furnished apartment. Let's see. Okay. If you have reserved furnished accommodation and you are wondering what items you may or should bring or buy yourself, please check the information on the housing provider's website or contact them directly to ask more information about furnishings. So here you can see some locations. All residence buildings are within traveling distance to Utrecht University buildings and Utrecht City Center by bike or public transport. Because all locations have their pros and cons, we would strongly advise you not to be too picky in regard of location. Being too picky can seriously decrease your chances of successfully placing a reservation when booking opens. Furthermore, the public transport network in the Netherlands is excellent. Given that the Netherlands is a small country and Utrecht is a small city, towns in the entire Utrecht region and even outside are at traveling distance. The entire province of Utrecht is about the same size as the city of London. For instance, the reserved accommodation in Zeist, which I don't know if you can see my mouse, but Zeist is on the right here, between De Bilt and Bunnik. It's salmon colored. So this is situated east of the Utrecht Science Park and is at cycling distance of the city center and Utrecht Science Park. And honestly, you're kind of closer if you're in Zeist to the Science Park than if you're, let's say, in the Zior accommodations you can see marked in red in the city center and in the international campus in the south there. All right, let's forge ahead. Additional facilities in the reserved housing is variable per residence building and is specified in the information provided by the housing provider. Some buildings, for example, offer an outdoors area or private balcony, a coffee, lounge or study corner, bicycle storage, and a laundry room. Each building has its own facilities that would make it a popular choice. You can see a selection from different buildings as a part of this slide. Okay, so let's address this rather large topic. So currently, it's that the reality is we can't predict what the future will become, will bring, however you want to finish that sentence. Currently, it's not possible to predict what kind of travel restrictions will still be in place for the next academic year. We understand that these are very uncertain times. For reserved accommodation program, we have therefore negotiated a leniency policy with the housing provider, so the commonly non-refundable advance payments become partially refundable if canceled on time. If, unfortunately, you will not enroll at Utrecht University and you submit a cancellation at least 4 weeks prior to the first month of rent, the advance payment is reimbursed, but minus a small cancellation fee, and this fee varies per housing provider. And yeah, any non-refundable booking fee. The measures taken and the advice provided on co-living and shared communal spaces by the providers of the reserved accommodation program will keep being adapted to the guidelines of the Dutch government. If measures are still necessary, more information will follow on this in approach to the start of the rental period. So that's essentially to say that we're not sure yet, but just keep in contact with us. And if you have any questions, send us an email and we can sort it all out. Everyone is doing their best to make this work. And so that's how we got this leniency policy. And yeah. Okay, so now that we've addressed the reserved accommodation program, let's talk about other ways to find student housing. Unlike student housing via the reserved accommodation program, for most student housing you find on the private housing market, you will first have to attend a group viewing. And the Dutch word for this that you might see is hospiteren. During such a viewing, the current tenants choose a new roommate from multiple candidates. Because the demand for housing in Utrecht is extremely high, finding housing this way takes time and effort. But the right preparation can increase your chances. So, let's see. How does one start? As a university, we're limited in the help we can offer, besides our reserved accommodation program. This is because, of course, as I said before, universities do not own or rent our own student housing. The student housing market in Utrecht is mostly informal, and new tenants are usually sought in direct student-to-student communication through ads on platforms and social media. Because this is very competitive, we're going to provide tips and information on our website to help you on your way and how best to prepare for this. Furthermore, in most countries, housing agencies would also rent out student accommodation. Many Dutch agencies commonly only offer homes and apartments to working individuals or couples. On our website, however, we have listed platforms, companies, and agencies that are known to offer student housing to internationals and Dutch students. So don't limit yourself to just one or two sites, but make sure to spread your chances out as much as possible. Start with reading the do's and don'ts on our website and make sure you are prepared for your search. This way, you can get a realistic idea of how to go about your search. The first and most important is not to postpone your search for housing and only rely on the reserved accommodation program until the summer or until after your arrival. A lot of students that are eventually successful in their search for housing via the private market put in a lot of time and energy. They started their search months in advance. And because housing ads usually don't receive numerous responses, wait, no, that's wrong. Housing ads receive numerous responses, and sometimes they may not see your reply. Don't let this get you down. Don't let it discourage you. It's kind of like applying for a job in a certain way. You just have to keep trying until you succeed. So yeah, don't give up. Keep putting yourself out there. So this is typically what you might find in a room on the private market. You could see lots of friends in these pictures, future friends. Private rooms in student houses are similar in that there will be shared facilities, and they're usually rented out unfurnished. So that means arriving and having to provide your own bed, your own mattress, your own wardrobe, things like that. The students who may already be occupying the house may have provided flooring, curtains, and other common furniture. And oftentimes, you're filling a spot that was occupied by another student. So if you get in contact with the student who's leaving, it's possible to purchase some of their items. Say, oh, you don't want to have to move your whole bed frame and mattress, right? I can take the wardrobe off your hands. A number of private housing companies in Utrecht also rent out studio accommodation with basic furnishings. This type of housing is usually much more expensive. Overall, more affordable options are scarcely available in Utrecht and rent out the quickest. So, yeah, I think being on social media and being in contact with students who are in your same study program or students in a student organization that you're interested in is a good way to make your way towards finding a spot in a student apartment like one of these. So where do students actually live in Utrecht province? And as you can see from the map, the answer is all over. Like the city of Utrecht is here in the middle, but all of this, like with the way public transport is set up in the Netherlands, it's just so easy. I mean, I don't live in Utrecht and I work in Utrecht and my commute is, I think, 30 minutes long. So, I mean, I haven't done it in a year, so it's been a while, but quite easy to get to Utrecht. As mentioned before, this entire province is about the same size as London, and the Netherlands is just a small country. And yeah, our public transportation is awesome. Because the demand for student housing in Utrecht is so high, Utrecht students also live in other cities in the province and in the Netherlands. Most of the surrounding towns, these little ones around here, are within cycling distance. And it's very flat here in the Netherlands, so don't expect hills or mountains. I think the steepest incline you ever encounter is a bridge. So it's easy to get everywhere by bike, if biking is an option for you. We would not recommend that you limit yourself to just 1 or 2 areas, as this would seriously decrease your chances. You can find student housing in all of Utrecht province, and there are no-go areas. Like everywhere is very safe. So you can check our website for a list of all the towns and cities in the area that are easily within reach of Utrecht. Let me say it again, uu.nl/housing. All right. So there is another service that you can look into, which is the SSH regular accommodation, which is there, and there's 2 varieties of this, long stay. Oh, sorry. Let me get that. Blah, blah, blah. So let's just talk about the long stay accommodation. And long stay accommodation is different from short stay accommodation in that short stay is furnished and part of the reserved accommodation program. The SSH long stay is unfurnished and not part of the reserved accommodation program. This is more similar to other private, backtrack. You probably don't know about this social housing in the Netherlands, so I'm not going to talk about it. But the waiting time for long stay is can be very long. It can be, I think, what was it, 12 months, 18 months or something. So you get on a waiting list. Yeah. Minimum of 1 year. And it also involves the group viewing or hospiteren process, which we'll explain a little bit more about in a second. Although it is not easy to get long stay housing, you could think about, if you're a bachelor student, for example, putting your name on the long stay list so that after the fixed contract period of your reserved accommodation, short stay, you might be able to then transition into long stay, having been on the list long enough to be at the top of the list, to be able to get a room. So, yes, it is strongly advised to register for this type of housing if you're planning to stay in the Netherlands for longer than a year. And it will increase your chances of finding housing if you start building up that waiting time. You can register now if you plan to study in the Netherlands for a long time. And you can find more information about this on our website. Okay, so hospiteren, group viewings. Like we said, in most typical student houses with shared facilities, the current tenants get to find their new roommate for a vacant room during a group viewing. Getting invited to a group viewing, as well as getting picked after the group viewing, or being voted in hospiteren, can be quite competitive. Usually students attend multiple times before they are picked by a house. A question we get a lot is, when does hospiteren in Utrecht begin? That makes it sound like there's some sort of like we're all the enrolled students are like at the start of a race and the gates open and then everyone starts competing. But there's no fixed moment. When a room becomes available, then the current housemates in that house start the hospiteren process and start looking for someone to replace that housemate. This can be at any point during the year, so there's no fixed hospiteren date. You see an open room, you apply for that room, and then the hospiteren process will start. For instance, let's see. There is usually around this time a slight increase in the offerings in the student housing market because students are graduating. So, and then therefore don't need their housing any longer. So now is a good time to start that hospiteren process. Yeah. And you can do it from abroad. You can do it over video chatting software and things like that. So definitely explore that option. But also, because all of you are now preparing to come, then there's also very high demand. All of this is just to underline that finding housing that requires hospituur is not necessarily at one moment on the calendar, and if you're lucky enough to find a housing ad and get invited to hospituur, don't expect this to be on a convenient moment in time, like in September. All right, now there's also, unfortunately, people on social media and places similar to that who are willing to trick you, and they specifically go for people who maybe aren't familiar with the Dutch housing market. So because there's such high demand, people will take advantage and post fake offers, asking for large down payments before they've, even met you. Basically, there's, you can see on the slide what to avoid and some do's and don'ts, but the golden rule is don't send any money until you've seen the place and signed a contract. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah, the most important thing is never transfer any money for accommodation that is found on the private market in advance. You can start negotiating in advance, but you need to see the place. My best practices thing, as someone who has been a victim of bad private market housing, is to meet the landlord, and actually, as you're signing things and transferring money and keys and things like that, to go and inspect the accommodation and together with the landlord and make sure everything's kosher. All right. On our website, you can find more information about what the latest trends in scamming is, because scammers will keep changing their methods and try new ways to convince you that you should transfer them money. If you are in any doubt about whether this is a sincere offer, you can send it to us and we'll help you verify its authenticity. So we'll do some research on your behalf to help you figure out, is this real? All right, last but not least, before we get to the live Q&A, let's talk about budget. So we often hear back from students that the rent for student accommodation is higher than what they're used to. Like mentioned earlier, affordable options are scarcely available. We therefore advise you to calculate a monthly budget of around 700 to 1,000 euros, and then in addition take into account some one-time fees like a security deposit, and sometimes people ask for 1 extra month's rent, or sometimes, and I don't know, this doesn't feel very fair, but because students aren't necessarily employed and the landlord wants some security in their accommodation, they might even ask for 2 months rent up front. Then you have to also factor in utilities, fees, municipal charges on top of the monthly net rent. On our website, you can find sort of the average costs of reserved accommodation, as well as more general information on various fees that you should expect when renting housing in the Netherlands. Make sure also to take into account the travel costs from wherever you're living to the Utrecht University buildings. And this can vary depending on the location and the mode of transportation. In which case, I always plug bicycling, because the cost of bicycling is putting nutritious food in your body that allows you to keep moving those feet. I feel like that's cheaper than perhaps the public transportation option. And then we also often get questions about a little thing that students have found called rent allowance. Rent allowance is not something that we control. This is something the Dutch government does, particularly the Dutch tax office. So we can't determine whether you're eligible for rent allowance. We can't determine whether you'll get it or not. Yeah, and we also can't help you apply. All of this is a relationship between you and Dutch officials. So studio accommodation that is eligible for this scheme is very popular, and the monthly allowance can be quite high if you have low or no income. So this can help you pay your rent in some situations. However, on the private market, these options are rarely available. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about how rent allowance. So just basically, the thrust of this presentation has just been, if you're coming to Utrecht, now is the time to start looking for your housing. So right after this, I expect you all to go check out our website. And then if you have any further questions that this presentation or the website hasn't answered, or us in the next few minutes, then go ahead and contact us, studentservices@uu.nl. All right, I believe it is now time for Arlinda to come back and for us to do our Q&A.
Yep, I am here. Yeah, so you've been giving us a lot of questions in the chat, and our colleagues have done their very best to answer them all. And we're gonna pick out a few questions now that we think are super important, and to repeat again. Do you want to ask the questions and I answer them?
Sure. I see them here. I'm gonna start here at the top and work my way down. I do believe, though, I did answer some of these questions earlier, but maybe it's worthwhile to go over them again. For example, how common is it to find accommodation in nearby towns such as Zeist, Houten? And is it a reasonable commute?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, as Lo also told in the presentation, you have to realize that the Netherlands is a very, very tiny country. Like, the distances are not that far away. Like, to compare, Utrecht is the same. Like, the whole province of Utrecht is the same as London downtown city, basically. So the distances are very small. So yes, it is very common to not live in Utrecht, but to live in smaller cities or smaller villages around it and actually commute. There's a lot of students who live in Houten or in Zeist or in the Bild. Me, myself, I actually also live in Bunnik, very close to Utrecht, and I cycle to the university. So of course you have to keep in account that if you want to take public transport, you have to see like how much does that cost and how would that work. You could have a sort of subscription for the public transport, which might be cheaper, but obviously the cheapest way is just to cycle.
All right.
I think that will help.
I'm going to see if I can pick out some more questions that are just maybe like a lightning round. So like that maybe I covered in the presentation, and we can just have a resounding like yes or no. So like, for example, are there fully furnished options?
Oh, yes, there are fully furnished options within the reserved housing program. So the first part that we talked about, the studios or the rooms that you can rent through the university, they are furnished. And furnished means that they have flooring, they have a bed, they have a wardrobe and a desk, basically. And it could differ per housing agency what actually is there when it comes to smaller things or bedding or utensils. Those are things that you have to check with the housing provider.
Okay, Elena wants to know, what is the average monthly rent?
The average monthly rent, I would say it's about 500 up to 1,000 euros. It can be quite expensive, so do make sure that you keep a realistic budget. Also count in additional costs such as a down payment or an extra month of rent, or maybe you have to come a bit earlier and you have to pay a bit more rent than you anticipated. So please make sure to calculate your budget realistically.
Okay, here's another one. How does hospiteren happen nowadays during the pandemic? Do we have to be there physically, or can it be organized online?
Yeah, well, actually, that's one of the one of the positive things maybe about this whole pandemic situation is that a lot of hospiteren avonden will happen online, because before it really used to be that you have to be in Utrecht and that they want to see you and meet you face to face. But now a lot of these things happen online, which is a benefit if you're not in the country yet. Of course, it could still be, it depends on what the roommate wants. I mean, they are the ones who organize it, so it could be that they still want you to visit live. But I think there's a lot of more options to do it online nowadays.
All right. Thanks for that lightning round, Arlinda. I'm now going to go into some questions that require a little bit more in depth. So if you're with me sort of towards the top of our questions that we have collected here,
Yeah.
I have a question that says, as an exchange student, are you able to book a room without having an acceptance letter?
Yes, you are. Yeah, I think that's also it can technically fall in the in the lightning round part, because the answer is yes. You don't need to have the acceptance letter yet. You can already book a room, but keep in mind that you book the rooms that are reserved for exchange students specifically, because there's different categories.
Right. You wouldn't be eligible for the other rooms if
No,
you were
exactly.
only staying for the period of an exchange student. All right. When is the right time to look for private housing? I think
When is the right time? Yeah.
I think that's in relationship to like thinking like I'm gonna apply for the reserved accommodation and then wait to see if I get it before I start applying for private housing.
Yeah, I can imagine that you think like that, but I mean, as we said, the demand in Utrecht for housing is just very high, and it's very competitive. So I would always recommend to not put your eggs in one basket, and do not expect that you will get one type of housing and don't look at all at any of the other options. So I would always advise to spread your chances and to already start looking now for other alternative options in case you don't get one of the reserved accommodation from UU.
All right. I have another longer question here, which is in the second year, how possible is it to book an SSH accommodation? Since this student has heard that it usually takes 3 years or more to wait in the line.
Yeah. So that is, it might be good to go over once again about the different types of SSH accommodation that we have. So SSH is one of the housing providers that we work with, and they reserve some rooms for the reserved housing accommodation program. So the first part that we talked about. But besides from that, they also have other types of accommodation that you can also apply for. But that works a little bit differently. So that means that you would just have to register with SSH, you have to create an account, you have to pay a fee once, I think it's about 30 euros, and then you're in their system. And that is based on waiting time. So the longer you are in the system, the bigger chances you have of getting assigned a room. And if you get assigned a room, it works with hospiteren. So it means that they invite the top 10 candidates, the 10 people that are on top of the list that have the longest waiting time, and they will be invited for a hospiteren avond, and then one of them will become the new roommate. But yes, you are right that the waiting times are very long. So this really only makes sense to do if you're planning to stay here for a longer time. So if you have a 1-year master program, if you are an exchange student, then don't bother registering with SSH regular because the waiting time is just too long. But if you have a 3-year bachelor's program, for example, then by all means register as soon as possible, like register today, so you build up the most possible waiting time. And then it could be that you can get a room through that later on in your studies.
Yeah, save your 30 euros if you're only here for a year. So I think this is it doesn't have the word Corona in it, but I think this is a Corona-related question. Can we invite a friend from the outside in the residence?
Yeah, well, of course, you have to keep in mind the Corona regulations and make sure that you can keep your distance and that you follow the rules of how many maximum people are allowed to stay in your house and things like that. But yes, of course, you are happy. You can invite other people. It could be that there's some rules in the contract when it comes to people like sleeping over or actually staying in your house for a few days, because technically they don't rent a room, so maybe that's not allowed. So it could be that there's something like that in your contract. But yeah, I think that that is all I can say about that, if that helps.
Yeah, well, this is the perfect bridge into my next question I have here, which is that can I stay with a friend from the same country because we got the same study program and we have we plan to rent one studio room for the both of us. So can we push our budget and save our budget for other needs? Is it possible to have 2 people staying in one room?
Yeah, I guess it depends for the reserved housing accommodation. I think there are clear rules like how many people are allowed to rent out a room. So it can only be one person, for example, if it's a studio. I don't think it's allowed to have two, but it would say so on the website, like what's the maximum number of people that can live here. Of course, what you could do is you can join together and look on the private market to see if there is a house that you can rent with the both of you. But do keep in mind that on the private market there usually are additional requirements when it comes to income or other types of things that they require. So it can be a bit difficult to do that, to search together for a house. But yeah, it is possible. But for the reserved accommodation program, I think it's really fixed and you are only allowed to live there with one person.
All right. Thank you for that answer, Arlinda. I have another question here about whether you can cancel your contract in another housing if you get an offer through a hospitiere.
Yeah, I think it really depends on like the requirements that are there in the housing that you reserved. So if you reserved something with the reserved accommodation program, then you have this leniency policy where you can cancel 4 weeks in advance. So if you get another room and you'd rather live there, then of course you can cancel your booking. If it's within this leniency period, you will probably lose the booking fee and some other maybe fee that is there, but most of the money.
There's a cancellation fee, yeah.
Cancellation fee, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so those kind of costs you would lose. But of course that is possible. You could choose to do that if you haven't signed a contract or there is still time within that leniency policy. Then by all means you can do that, and then that means that the room will become available again for someone else.
All right, Arlinda, you've done well in this quiz show so far. Let's see if you can get this one. Do we have to be there physically to sign the contract, or can it be done online?
For the reserved accommodation program, I believe it can be done online.
That's true.
That's true, right? Yeah.
100 points.
Yeah, it could be that for the private market that they want you to be there in person. That can differ, of course, because they are the owner of the house, so they can say what they would like in that sense. But for the reserved accommodation program, you can do it from abroad, so you don't have to be in the country.
All right. So one student here has found kamernet.nl, and they're wondering whether this is a site for private housing and whether these rooms go through the hospitiere process.
Yeah. So Kamernet, it's kind of like a sort of eBay for rooms. So everyone can just post a sort of advertisement on Kamernet, and then people can react to it. So that's usually the private market, and that means that it does include hospiteren. It could be that there are some exceptions. Maybe they say this is just for a temporary room or just first come first serve. I don't know. It would say so in the advertisement. So you would have to check. Usually in these kind of ads, it would say the hospiterenavond is on 20 April or something like that. So you can already sort of keep that day free in your agenda.
I also see on Kamernet, back when I was looking on Kamernet, I don't know if it's still true, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, but don't I also see lots of like, oh, look, this place is available for 1 month. You're subleasing from me. I'll be gone for 1 month. Enjoy.
Yeah, that's true. There's also a lot of temporary offers on Kamernet, and not just on Kamernet, also on Facebook and other types of website where people put advertisements of rooms. And of course, I can understand that you would rather have something just for the full year or for the full duration of your studies. But yeah, this really falls under the fact that there's a lot of high demand and you can't really be too picky. So if you can get a very nice room to stay in for 2 months, I would always recommend to just do it. And then from there, when you're actually in the country, you can get more connections, you can meet other people, then you can look into other options or something more permanent. It's very common for students in the Netherlands to move around. When I was a student, I think I've lived in 5 different houses during the 4 years that I've studied, and that's really not uncommon. That's actually very normal. Yeah, so don't let that take you back if it's just for a shorter period of time. I would always recommend to just do it.
I've lived here I'm getting close to 4 years, and I've moved 7 times.
Well, look at that. That's even more than me.
Got you beat. All right, I've got another question here. I think this is a good one. And it is about self-quarantine. So due to the pandemic, can we go straight to our accommodation, or would we have to wait and self-quarantine at another place after arriving?
Ooh,
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer to that one.
That's a toughie. Yeah, I think yeah, I would advise to just see when you've got the accommodation to see if you can plan it like that you can directly move into your house and quarantine there. That's what I would do. Like I would make sure that when I know that I would get the keys on a certain date, then I would plan my trip that I would come on that date, so that I can just directly move in and quarantine there. I think I would do that. And yeah, there's a lot of like grocery services that you can call in the Netherlands to get your groceries delivered to your home and things like that. There's a lot of services like that. So I think it's relatively easy to self quarantine in the Netherlands. Of course, it's not very fun. But we try to help you as best as possible. A lot of these activities and also orientation activities will be done online, so you can also follow them if you have to be in quarantine. So we try to make it as nice as possible for you.
Yeah, I think it really, I mean, we just have no way of knowing what the situation will be come September. So
no, exactly.
It very much depends on what the Dutch government says. You can check our website, like uu.nl/en for English /information-coronavirus. And we have up-to-date information there about how the university is responding to the situation. But then, of course, you have different housing providers may have different policies. And then if you're on the private market, your new roommates might say, oh, we prefer you not to quarantine near us. Or they might say, oh, yeah, as long as you stay in your room and like one of us will bring your food to your door. No, get out of the kitchen. I don't know. It's very individual. So you just sort of have to take it, communicate and plan accordingly.
Yeah, definitely.
If going through private housing, is it possible to look for a house or an apartment with friends?
Yeah, well, of course, it is possible. You can always see what is on offer. But as I said before, also when we talked about maybe moving in with a friend, it can be difficult. Usually it's more easy to rent a room than it is to rent a whole house and share the facilities. Mainly because they usually require a certain income, or they want to make sure that you're a stable renter. And usually students, because they don't have a lot of income and they don't work full time, it can be quite difficult to do that. Yeah, you can get lucky, but it's not like the most recommended way, I would say.
All right, here's a good question, which is near and dear to my heart. Can you apply for the reserved accommodation to live with a partner who is not a student?
I think you can for some accommodations, but most of them will not allow it. But I think there's a few in Camelot that have the possibility to live there with an additional person, with a partner. But that is something that you would have to check on the UU housing website, uu.nl.
Exactly.
It would state like all the different requirements of the room. What do they have? Who can live there? What does it cost? And then you can say you can see which ones best fits your needs.
Yes. Yeah. There's very few apartments for couples. They exist, but they're few, and ideally your partner should also be a UU student. All right, moving on down. Do we need to do anything before the register date, i.e. the 28th of April, for the housing, that is, if we want to rent housing the school will give to us? Okay, that's an interesting question. Let's try that again. Let me see if I can rephrase that. Do we need to do anything before April 28th if we want to if we want to rent the reserved accommodation?
Do you need to do anything before April 28th? Yeah, so if you want to apply for the SSH housing, they have a registration date that opens on the 28th of April. So there's nothing you have to do before that date. You just have to make sure that you register on that 28th of April in advance. And that is because the university needs to verify your registration. So you register with SSH, and then the university will check and make sure that you are actually allowed to register, that you're actually a UU student, that you fulfill the requirements, and then they will approve you. So that is why there is this earlier date of registering. And when it comes to the other housing providers, they don't have this early registration date, but they will verify, obviously in the same way they will verify if you're eligible for this housing program.
Perfect. I think we probably still have a lot more questions, but technically we are, what, 15, 20 minutes over time. And we could go on answering questions all day, but, you know, we got things to do. So just a few things you students should know before we take off, and that is that we are doing another webinar on housing in May, specifically for that second half, to go more into that second half of our presentation, other ways to find housing aside from the reserved accommodation program. So if you get to April 28th and you're still not sure what your situation will be, sign up for that webinar. We're going to go through all this in more depth, and we'd love to see you there. Also, if you have more questions after the Q&A, contact Student Services. And I bet our colleagues in the chat, I'm not exactly looking at the chat, but I bet they're providing that email address right about now, studentservices@uu.nl. And then lastly, a recording of this presentation and this Q&A will be made available to you in the follow-up to this event. So yeah, we got you. Don't worry, we got you. And in that all being said, thank you all for coming. Do you have anything to wrap it up for us, Arlinda?
No, I think you've said it all. I hope this was useful for you. I hope we've taken away some of your worries and yeah, give you a realistic overview of what the housing situation is like in Utrecht. And yeah, we hope to see you soon, and thank you for watching.